6.1, core ideas of the Enlightenment. Big section, probably in the context of our class. There may not be 2 or 3 more important sections than this one. It is incredibly important to understand. So you may be watching this after we have gone through the big ideas in class. If so, good decision, young person, because it is a PDAO and a section that you might want to catch a couple times. So the core ideas of the Enlightenment, what are we looking at? We're looking at the buzzwords. What's the Enlightenment all about? And then we're going to look at how Enlightenment thinkers viewed certain things differently and how at the same time some Enlightenment thinkers, the majority actually, will view other issues the same as traditional values. So this is an intellectual movement, the Enlightenment. It's intellectual in the sense that it is a thought-based movement. We're not fighting here. We're not trading. This is thinking in a different way, and that eventually is going to impact other things. So it's the late 17th and 18th century Europe movement, which saw rational and empirical or evidence-based thought that challenges traditional values and ideas. It is centered in Paris, in France, thanks in part to the cultural legacy that Louis XIV left behind, the increase of wealth, which brought culture and learning and knowledge to Paris. Not that it wasn't there already, but now more of it is going to come, and you can thank Louis XIV for kind of that legacy. So the Enlightenment develops in Paris and in France as an intellectual movement which sees rational and empirical thought. So what is the Enlightenment about? Again, I don't know what's up with the book, so just forget it. The core ideas: equality. All people should be treated equally. And I put the asterisk there, of course, because that might notate that all doesn't refer to all kinds of people. Women, racial minorities, even cultural minorities in some sense. But we're looking more toward a social equality for all economic classes. So that pyramid, in theory, you would treat those at the bottom with those at the top. In theory, right? All of this is theory. It's Enlightenment thinking. Progress. Humanity is getting better. We're not getting worse. We learn from our mistakes and we improve. Tolerance. The freedom to practice other ways of life that's most applicable in the Enlightenment to the religious context. Liberty. Every person is born with natural rights. In that when you are born, you have certain things that a government cannot take away. I apologize for that. That's gross. Reasoning. Decisions should be made or should make sense and have logical, empirical evidence. So the decisions a person makes should make, quote, sense. Now, here's the question. What are the opposite of these ideas? How can we characterize 15th to 17th century thinking? How are these 5 buzzwords different than, say, the buzzwords of the past? Something to think about. So a lot of these thinkers that we're going to look at here are called philosophers. They are people who are looking to reform society along the lines of reason and logic. And if you look on the screen, you can tell these men and eventually women have much wealth. They're socioeconomically high on the pyramid. They're probably merchants or middle-class bourgeoisie at the very least. And they are probably nobility, certainly some of them. You don't really see a lot of royals that become known as philosophers. They would be the ones just under them, the ones that maybe could have something to gain by different political orientation. So let's start with the idea of human nature. We start with a man named Thomas Hobbes. Question of human nature: are you inherently good or inherently bad? And Thomas Hobbes says that you're bad. I mean, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And the only way that we can protect ourselves from ourselves is that if we have a government that can stand in and basically get in between us, right? I mean, you see when the 2 people are fighting, that you try to get someone in between to kind of knock them away from each other. What Hobbes' theory is that if you have person A and person B who want to do a little this, that the government can step in and be strong enough to dissuade those 2 from fighting. So what Hobbes assumes is that the people realize that without the government there in the middle, that we're such crappy people that we'll just beat on each other all the time. So the government has to be strong enough to stand in between. This idea is called a social contract, because what happens here in essence, according to Hobbes, is that the people say, all right, we're going to give up our ability to throw hands and we're going to give up that freedom and other things so that the government can come in the middle and protect us. So again, it's a contract. It's like the government is there. We're going to let this person rule. We're going to let them rule over us as long as they can protect us from ourselves because we're so terrible. Okay, that idea is kind of illustrated in what was called the Leviathan, which is Hobbes's main work or piece, basically. And as you can see here, you've got this tall guy representing the king ruling over the land. But if you look closely, he is made up of the citizens. So we've studied before absolutism, where basically the king's like, I don't do what I want, right? Divine right. But in this case, the people make up the king. And without the people, the king is just a severed head. I mean, there's nothing there. So Thomas Hobbes' theory is not, yes, it's absolutism. Yes, it's absolute monarchy. But it is in a different context than divine right. This is called maybe, quote, will of the people, where the people have willed the monarch to rule as long as the monarch can protect people from each other. Now, kind of a different look is this guy named John Locke, who by human nature states that people are born inherently good. But you possibly, over the span of your life, could turn into a baddie. And he has this idea called tabula rasa. Tabula rasa assumes that when you're born, you are a blank slate, right? There's nothing to you, you're blank, right? There's nothing there. But as you live, your experiences create who you are. So, something bad happens that might shadow your personality, something good, you kind of learn something about yourself. Your experiences determine who you are. So with the question of human nature, Hobbes is more of the anti-progress, anti-improvement. Locke, certainly, you kind of learn from your experiences, and then it's a little bit more of an optimistic view. So if you had to say one of these were Enlightenment and one of these weren't, you definitely say Hobbes is probably pre-Enlightenment, because it's not a very sunny disposition. It assumes the worst in people, and it also potentially has people taking away their liberties. So Hobbes is the pre-Enlightenment idea, and Locke is the human nature idea from the Enlightenment. So let's talk specific concepts from the Enlightenment. So first of all, the Enlightenment. New political models are based on the concept of natural rights, that our government structure is based on the idea that we, the people, have natural rights that cannot be taken away. So our friend John Locke is back. John Locke believes that when you're born, that you are born with unalienable natural rights. They cannot be taken away. Those rights are the right to life, the right to liberty, and the right to property, that the government can't take away something that you own, right? Can't do it. So John Locke says, when you pop out of the womb, you have those rights that cannot be taken. Now, he also states that if a government doesn't protect those rights, then it can be overthrown. So if the government doesn't stand in and say, listen, we honor your rights, we're going to make laws to protect them, then the people, according to Locke, have the right and the responsibility to rise up and overthrow the government. So again, in class, we talked about, what does that look like? Does that look like revolution all the time? Does it look like pitchforks and torches and guns and death? Or could it look something more democratic, like the voting system? Or if we don't feel like the government's protected our rights, we can pop it out and rebel. It's something to think about with Locke, is that, yes, the government is being given responsibility through this social contract, but it's done in such a way that the people can, if the government has been short on their commitment, on their efforts to protect your rights, we can vote them out, right? We can get a new government, theoretically. The second one is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Rousseau believes in this concept called the general will, in that it's not as specific, let's say, as Locke's idea. What the general will assumes is that a government should exist to carry out the will of the majority, the consensus of the majority, that whatever the majority of the people want is where the government should go, and rulers are there to serve the community's interest. So a ruler does not exist to serve himself or even parliament or the wealthy, but he serves the majority. So whatever the majority want, that's where you go. And that's got some big implications we'll look at next unit. Last one here in this concept is Baron de Montesquieu. Montesquieu assumes that your absolute monarch is corrupt, and that a person has too much power if they have all of the elements of government underneath their own control. So Montesquieu assumes that, or not assumes, but states that you should take government and split it into different branches, different segments, whatever word you want to call it. Of course, for us, it's called branches. I don't know how many branches. Montesquieu threw out the number 3. I don't know if that's familiar to you, but Montesquieu says that you should divide it so that not one side of government becomes too powerful. So Locke, Rousseau, Montesquieu, 3 philosophers who had different takes on how political models should be based and constructed based on the concept of natural rights, and that a government cannot take those away from you and should be altered in order to protect your natural rights. So, concept dos. Reasoning should be applied to society and human institutions. That things should make sense. Like the way things are set up in our society should make logical sense that are confirmed and based on evidence. So let's talk about Voltaire. Voltaire, super sarcastic guy. You'd love him. Voltaire's big commitment is the idea of free speech, that you should have the ability to speak out and speak your mind whenever you'd like. His famous quote is, "I do not agree with what you say, but I defend to the death your right to say it." And anyone who stood in the way of free speech was on his list, especially the Catholic Church. For him, throughout history, the church had stood in the way of that freedom, and they had restricted freedom of expression. And there's probably some good examples that we could pull to say, yeah, you could probably argue that. But he opposed superstition. He opposed everything in religious doctrine that could not be based on reason. He doesn't necessarily say God doesn't exist, but he questions whether or not God is active in the world. And that's the thought we'll see again in 6.2, is that, is God really there? I mean, is God active in the world at all? So he's very much against that, or I guess quizzing that idea and wondering about it. In terms of the church, he had a quote, "Crush the infamous thing." So Voltaire is certainly someone who's not friendly to the church, and the church knows this and will ban all his works and, I'm sure, excommunicate him even in the 1700s. The second guy in this concept is Cesare Beccaria. There's Cesare, nose in a book. His expertise is the judicial system. And Beccaria says that the punishment of a crime should be based on the level of damage it does to society. That you should not cut somebody's hand off if they steal a piece of bread. Even though that may be illegal, does that hurt a lot of people, right? So your punishment should mirror the damage that it does to everybody else. Additionally, Beccaria states that punishment should not be for revenge, but it should be carried out for the rehabilitation of the person and to state the message that this crime is not tolerated. So it's not done for revenge. It's not done to punch the person in the face. It's done to kind of grow into a better society, either the individual being rehabilitated or warning everyone else this should not happen again. He also opposes the death penalty and the use of torture, which is standard procedure in the 1700s, and we all even know today, 250 years later, that this is still a question in our society whether the death penalty and torture are applicable and appropriate in our justice system and intelligence gathering services. So Beccaria saying, hey, you know what? This guy killed the king, and then we went all ham on him. He didn't kill the king. He didn't even try to kill him. In our Tormenta source that we read, it didn't even happen. So why are we going all big, stripping flesh off his bones and things like this? It just doesn't make sense. And Beccaria had some, as you see, thoughts on how to progress further. Concept trace. Equality in the Enlightenment. It did not include gender or racial equality. So this is the asterisk that we looked at. Rousseau kind of spoke to this in some of his writings. His question was, you know what? A woman, the purpose should be to be in domestic roles, to be a wife and mother. So what's the point in even educating women? It shouldn't be a thing that should happen. Men should be educated. So he certainly didn't call for women to be in that, because at the end of the day, not only should their role be to be wife and mother, But women can't reason like men can. Again, that's Rousseau's perspective on that. But obviously, there were some differences. Mary Wollstonecraft is a British woman. Many of these are French people. Wollstonecraft is British. And her argument late in the 1700s is that women are considered inferior because throughout history they had not been given the opportunity to prove themselves on an equal playing field as men. Logically kind of makes sense, right? But it's a very radical thought at the time, is that whatever men are doing in the public sphere, women can do as well. And we've seen a couple examples of stout women leaders politically, but certainly, and we've seen also the Reformation kind of encouraging women's literacy, but across the bow of Europe, basically, we have not seen the insistence of leaders of society to promote the potential of women. And just in general, the Enlightenment, again, is not a social changing event, at least right away. This is an intellectual movement. So here's kind of a theme for this whole unit. Just because we talk about the changes doesn't mean the changes happen immediately, right? Wollstonecraft's saying this. Women are not really going to get a lot of educational opportunities outside of the very wealthy for another 100 years. Just because the idea is suggested doesn't mean it becomes the status quo immediately. Sometimes that happens. In the Enlightenment, it's very rare that you say something and it's going to immediately go into play and become something that everybody follows, right? Just because Rousseau and Montesquieu say, hey, we shouldn't have absolute monarchy, doesn't mean that all the kings just quit, right? So that's something to consider, is that this is overall very small change in terms of practical things during the Enlightenment. It kind of has to take a generation or so for those changes to be applied. So again, the old barriers will remain unless, and 6.3 gathers and gets into this, unless the powers that be, particularly absolute monarchs, are influenced by Enlightenment ideas. I don't know what that was, I'm sorry. So if they're influenced, then great, right? Everything's great. But if not, there's going to be no impetus to change. And 6.3 is going to talk to you about some absolute monarchs that were influenced by Enlightenment principles. So there's Mary Wollstonecraft looking all Wollstonecrafty. By the way, her daughter will become known as Mary Shelley, who wrote... Figure that book out. That was a good impression. Let me do it again. Okay, you can figure it out. Concept 4. Government censorship should not stop the free exchange of ideas. Even though the government steps in and says no, doesn't mean that the ideas should not be shared. Several types of environments are going to spread Enlightenment thinking. It's not going to be the king with I almost said a blowtorch. That was a weird laugh, sorry. It's not going to be kings giving speeches, right? So this is going to have to be organic, coming up from the bottom with the middle class and in some cases the nobility really raising the stakes. A couple places you see Enlightenment ideas discussed thoroughly. Coffee houses, right? We established those in 5.2, the Consumer Revolution. These are places, and these are the ideas that at these coffee houses, the noblemen, the middle class, that's what they're talking about, right? There's another place called a salon we'll get to and explain here in a second. Now, there is another Enlightenment philosopher who makes a kind of a play here. His name is Denis Diderot. And he writes compiles what becomes known as the Encyclopedia, where he takes Enlightenment articles and compiles them into one huge book, right? It's called the Encyclopedia. And it becomes incredibly popular in certain circles, but in others becomes very, very unpopular because some of the ideas that are stated in the encyclopedia call for the removal of monarchy and the removal of the church, and you got the monarchy and the church that are still kind of in charge. So it becomes kind of persona non grata for a lot of places where it's a book that's banned, it's a book that's blacklisted, and you can't have it. But yet, with the printing press and with the support of middle class and some nobility, the encyclopedia gets out and is spread and is digested and is learned very 95 Theses style, where people are reading and considering, hey, look at all these ideas in one place. maybe we can mold and change and reform society to be something a little bit better. One of those places was a salon. And before I get to salons, another serves a growing literate population, develops public opinion, meaning that the encyclopedia is like catnip for people who have just learned how to read. And that includes bourgeoisie, right? I mean, the bourgeoisie weren't necessarily, and the nobility. It doesn't mean they had great literacy skills before, but this is something that's exciting and different and new, right? I mean, it's cool to have something that's been banned, right? I mean, you get something and it's like, ooh, look at this. Nobody else can have this. Like these seeds. I don't know, these seeds have been here for a long time, and they did like plant them or something. So anyway, it serves a growing literate population, develops public opinion, where people in different circles start to develop political opinions that are different than let's just do what the king says. So it's a little bit of a controversy, something of that opinion. Salons, okay, coffee houses were nice, very laid back places. Now get your coffee, drink whatever, parties, right? Now this is something very different. These were parties hosted by the nobility, in which you get all dressed up, you go play your piano, light your candles, and then get your cigars or whatever and sit around and discuss politics and economics and social graces and all these things that are the high and mighty ideas of the time, and you do it in a high and mighty location. That is something that we're going to see and act out ourselves, is this Enlightenment salon. But it's something that motivates and mobilizes not the high class, but the higher classes under the royalty, that potentially could have interesting consequences. Not the nobility and even the middle class involved a little bit in the salon. So in any case, those are the key ideas of the Enlightenment. And I'm going to close by going back to this. Equality, progress, tolerance, liberty, reasoning. It's these ideas and the concepts that followed that are around and present in Europe for still 250 years. How well will they be applied to society? How well will society, or how much will society change to fit the ideas of the Enlightenment? And will there be pushback? And will there be push forward? And the conflict that develops because of these new ideas is going to define European and world history starting in Unit 7 when we head to France and we have a little revolution. So the Enlightenment, key ideas, make sure and understand them and be able to summon them and then see where in society, politics, society, economics, religion, where do those ideas come from and are visible and present. And I'm going to stop moving my hands and in 6.1 podcast. Goodbye.